Turmoil in South Africa. Is Zuma playing Russian roulette with the country's economy? Also on today's program, to some he's a hero, to others a war criminal. We ask if Rwandan President Paul Kagame should run for a third term. And in picture this, the great jade excavation. Why miners in Myanmar are rushing to unearth the precious green gem. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. A troubled economy, accusations of incompetence and even a trending hashtag calling for his resignation. It's been a bad week for South Africa's President Jacob Zuma. He's been playing a game of musical chairs with his finance ministers. He's rattled through 3 in less than a week and the economy certainly noticed. The rand fell to a record low against the dollar and banks plummeted 15%. Wiping out $8.6 billion in share value. The economy may have quietened, but the rallying call for the ANC leader to step down has not. Today's Newsmaker is a leader whose presidency has been noted for its frequent corruption scandals, a leader whose power in the ANC could be waning. Today's Newsmaker is South Africa's President Jacob Zuma, as we ask if he is killing his country's economy.
Zuma must fall! Zuma must fall! Zuma must fall!
Zuma must fall, they cry. Protesters blaming their president for South Africa's economic crisis. The economy's been spinning out of control. The country's had 3 finance ministers in less than a week. The stock market plunged and then recovered a bit, and the currency's been losing value. Jacob Zuma's decision-making is at the centre of it all. So what happened to Africa's second largest economy, and what's going to happen next?
Of the Republic of South Africa, President Jacob Zuma.
President Zuma's at the heart of this crisis. He previously supported the highly respected Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, seen here being sworn in last year.
I, Nhlanhla Musa Nene, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa.
But last week, Nene was replaced by this man, a little-known backbench MP. David Van Rooyen is a favourite of the president. South Africa's press responded with shock, speculating he was appointed as a yes man for Zuma. Regardless of the reason, markets tanked and the president was blamed. Investors pulled funds out of the country, triggering the currency, the rand, to collapse to an all-time low against the dollar. And on Twitter, the hashtag Zuma must fall began trending. After 4 days of economic panic and protest, Zuma was forced to make a U-turn. The mounting discontent meant Van Rooyen was asked to step down, and Pravin Gordhan, a former finance minister, came back, ushered in as his replacement.
We are not going to make reckless decisions. We are going to ensure that the kind of discipline that government has demonstrated since 1994 is the kind of discipline that will continue.
For President Zuma, the last week has been a humiliation. Shortly after Pravin Gordhan's return, markets picked up in a collective sigh of relief. But there are still concerns about South Africa's downtrodden economy, including high unemployment, slow growth and a weakening currency.
We are not a competitive global manufacturer or miner anymore, so we're going to struggle.
South Africans, especially those concerned about good governance and tackling corruption, have long called to kick Zuma out of office. He is under pressure. A president tainted by scandal who remains in power, but Zuma still must fall, is now a rallying cry on social media. Duncan Crawford, The Newsmakers.
And joining me now to discuss if Jacob Zuma is ruining the South African economy in Cape Town is Daniel Silk. He's a political economist and director of the Political Futures Consultancy. And in Johannesburg is Mzwanele Manyi. He's a former cabinet spokesperson for the ruling ANC and the president of the Progressive Professionals Forum. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. Daniel Silk, has the president made some really bad decisions over the past week?
There's no doubt that what's happened in the last week has set South Africa back economically, and I might add politically as well. However, although there were specific events of the last week that are extremely damaging, and I think we'll still see the effects filter through into our economy over the next year, we've been ailing under a combination of both global economic headwinds and also very poor domestic economic policy, or virtually non-existent economic policy. So in fact, the last week exacerbated a situation in South Africa that was already extremely negative, as both markets and the rating agencies pointed out to us before Jacob Zuma took the decision to reshuffle his cabinet and play musical chairs with the finance ministry.
Yes, talking about that ratings agency, particularly Moody's, Mzwanele Manyi, Moody's have downgraded South Africa from stable. It's no longer stable, it's now negative. This is a non-existent economic policy, says Daniel Silk. What do you think?
Look, I think it's important that we understand some context. And the context here is that the currency in South Africa has really been on a generally downward slope. And this started way back in 2010 as a result as well of some of the global meltdowns, as it were. So I think it's important that as we do this, people mustn't become too expedient, because up until the president made the announcement, the rand had slided all the way to 14 rand 53 about, as it were, and then it only dropped to 15 or 16 rand after that. But the bulk of the drop of the rand has been largely due to world markets and world global markets activities, as it were. To now decide to then blame everything else to these announcements, I really think it's a bit on the disingenuous side.
Those thousands of people on the streets of Johannesburg and Cape Town today who are calling for Zuma to fall, are they just misled?
I think largely, indeed, they are misled. These are largely people in the opposition side of things. You could actually put this as forum shopping. They have been trying all kinds of things. First of all, 2014, they lost elections miserably. The largest opposition party is like 22%. Now, if they can't get their way right in the polls, then they go to parliament, they try to impeach the president. And even there, they fail. Now they've taken to the streets. And it was actually a very poor attendance this March. Let me give you a context. In South Africa today, it's a public holiday, middle of the week. Everybody is at home. And we have a population of some 50,000 people. People that turned out today, at best, you can put them at 15,000. And I'm being very generous here. At 15,000 and countrywide, which is a very shockingly poor number. If you spread that up in different regions, it really fizzled out. So indeed, the overwhelming majority of people of South Africa have got full confidence in President Zuma and his administration.
I want to go to Daniel Silk. Are you buying any of that, Daniel Silk?
Well, I certainly think that there has been a drop-off in support for the African National Congress statistically at the polls, and in particular, I might add, in South Africa's big metropolitan urban areas. And we've really seen that drop-off occur in the election last year, when the ANC barely managed to win the majority of votes in the symbolically important Nelson Mandela Bay Metro in Port Elizabeth. In the Tshwane, which is the Pretoria, the capital city of South Africa, the ANC actually got just below 50% of the vote in both of those two big metropolitan areas. And South Africans really will be given a constitutional chance next year in local government elections, the most competitive and robust elections that we have had in South Africa since 1994, to really vent their anger and frustration and potentially vote against the African National Congress. Now, I don't believe that a majority of South Africans are going to reject the ANC at the elections next year. But I think that the actions of the last week and the decline in the economy, question marks about leadership are going to have an effect of weakening the ANC incrementally in South Africa. And if that means the beginning of the end of ANC rule in some of these big metropolitan areas next year, that will symbolically be important and will also create further divisions in the ruling party and can hasten the end of Jacob Zuma before his official term runs out.
Mzwanele Mani, you can't disagree.
No, I think
hold on for a second.
just
Just for a second. You can't disagree with the fact that over the past three elections, the ANC has progressively lost support. Doesn't Daniel Silk have a point here that the ANC needs to do something in order to arrest that trend?
He has no point. He's just being wishful. What is the issue here? The situation we have in this country is that ANC has been running South Africa for the past 21 years. And in this whole 21 years ANC being in power, ANC has never dropped below 60, which is unprecedented in modern democracy. Usually by this time, 20 years later, everything collapses as it were. The ANC has managed to maintain momentum. In fact, in global standards, you can go to the US, you can go to Britain, you can go anywhere in the first world. The kind of lead that the ANC has in terms of 62% is way comfortable lead, is a lead that shows that the people of this country continue to express a lot of confidence in the ANC. All these are negative things that are being said were said in 2014. We even had an Nkandla issue that people said because of this, people have lost confidence in the ANC. The numbers continue to show up the ANC. We've just had the by-elections countrywide. If you look at the numbers, even there, the African National Congress continues to clean up, continues to be the hope of the people. So all of these things that are being said now is really the hopes and aspirations of the opposition. But unfortunately, the people of South Africa continue to have confidence in the ANC, and they'll continue to do so. They have expressed it today. They were on holiday today. They heard about this march. No one went. Those that went are just a handful of people, a smattering here and a smattering there, that have been assisted by media, that focuses, take a group shot and just gives it a halo effect as if this thing is
Okay, so let me ask you for the record then, Mr. Mani. Do you still have full confidence in President Zuma to lead the ruling party and to lead the country economically?
Indeed, and without a question of doubt, as the Progressive Professionals Forum, which is a body of professionals with a lot of educated people, which spans across all sectors of the professions. I lead engineers, I lead doctors, I lead lawyers. There's many of us here in the country that are educated, and we are saying that the President Zuma is still the best thing to have happened in South Africa. You must understand, even that Gini coefficient, if you go to the analysis of that, it's not because people have become poorer, it's because the rich have become exceedingly richer, as it were, because the world market opened to them. So this growth in Gini coefficient is not because people have got any poorer. And also, the issue of what's happening on the ground, South Africa is not an island. We're globalizing. We're a teenager in country terms. We just got into the world place, and we're still feeling ourselves in. So therefore, the global markets are impacting on some of the things that are happening at a local level.
We are running out of time. South Africa is not a teenager anymore, in the sense that it's into its 20s now. Perhaps, Daniel Silk, can you foresee the ANC and President Zuma behaving more maturely with the economy in the next few months and years? Final thought.
Well, look, I think that if there's any lesson from this last week, it's that the big man style of politics that Jacob Zuma tried to practice by virtually, and I'm not saying totally, but virtually unilaterally taking a decision to fire a fairly well-respected cabinet minister, that kind of big man action is now going to find checks and balances coming from within Jacob Zuma's own cabinet and other senior members of the ANC. I think we came perilously close in South Africa to a palace revolt or a palace coup over the course of the last few weeks, as President Zuma was read the Riot Act backed not just by business interests, but by members of his own cabinet, senior members as well. So if there's any positive lesson for this, it's that South Africa is indeed not an island to itself. It is a country linked globally through international financial systems, through the market, and indeed satisfying and providing positive sentiment to the market is what's going to continue to drive at least some degree of recovery for South Africa. We've learned that lesson the very hard way. We will stare down a ratings downgrade. We will potentially suffer further inflation in South Africa next year as a result of a weaker currency. And unfortunately, it is a pity that we have to learn the way of global economics the hard way through inefficiency and poor governance.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Daniel Silk and Mzwanele Mani, thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, why Rwanda is voting on its president's future. And in Picture This, we take a look at Myanmar's jade rush. It has been more than 20 years since Rwanda spiraled into genocide. 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were killed over 100 days. The violence ended when a Tutsi rebel group led by current President Paul Kagame took over. He has officially been in power since 2000, and under his leadership, Rwanda has seen peace and economic growth. But critics accuse him of war crimes and cracking down on dissent. On Friday, Rwandans will vote on whether to change the constitution and allow Kagame to run for a third term. The Newsmakers Yvette McCullough looks at the upcoming referendum as we ask whether Rwanda needs Kagame to remain a secure country.
A petition to keep their president, gift-wrapped and delivered to Parliament. It's this man who 3.6 million Rwandans petitioned to keep as their leader. Paul Kagame, considered by some as the saviour of the country, but seen by others as a war criminal. He officially came to power in 2000. He served 2 terms as president, and a third would be unconstitutional. But on Friday, Rwandans will vote in a referendum on whether to change the constitution. A change that would mean the president could potentially remain in power until 2034. For some Rwandans, he is seen as a stabilising force in a nation where horrific violence is such recent history. It was a brutal atrocity that shocked the world. The systematic murder of 800,000 people in a 100-day killing spree. The international community remains accused of failing to prevent the killings. The genocide ended when the Tutsi-dominated rebel group, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Kagame, took control of the country. Hutu extremists and thousands of ordinary people fled to neighbouring states. More than 20 years on, Rwanda has managed to put its past behind it. And under President Kagame's guidance, it has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and it aims to become a middle-income country by 2020. While Rwanda and the rest of the world has promised that never again will we see such genocide, talk of Kagame stepping down evokes fears of chaos.
Africa's democratic progress is also at risk when leaders refuse to step aside when their terms end.
The US has called on Kagame to resist the lure of power and set an example for the region, where many veteran leaders are desperately trying to hold on. In neighbouring Burundi, at least 240 people have been killed since April, in violence sparked by President Pierre Nkurunziza announcing he would run for a third term. And there are signs of renewed ethnic violence there. In Rwanda, there's also concern about the sincerity of people's desire to keep Kagame. Human rights groups accuse him of cracking down on political and press freedom. But Kagame has hit back at other nations for interfering in Rwanda's internal affairs. And he says he won't decide on whether to run for another term until after the people have had their democratic choice. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London is international media consultant Steve McCauley, who's worked extensively on media reform in Rwanda. Thanks a lot for joining us, Steve. It sounds...
My pleasure.
It does sound as if Paul Kagame wants to be president for life. That can't be a good thing, can it?
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens after the referendum. And I think personally think it's a foregone conclusion that the referendum will see a yes vote for constitutional change. And barring some kind of surprise, the president will then agree to run for another term. Whether it's a good thing or not, of course, opinion is divided on that. But if you talk to people, and the people I know in Rwanda, and I visit the country frequently, are extremely keen on him staying. The people I've spoken to are in favour of continuity. And they think that even though it's only 21 years since 800,000 people died in 100 days of violence, that we're still in sort of relatively early phases of the recovery of that country.
The Human Rights Watch says there's little tolerance for dissent in Rwanda. How much of a factor might that be in people showing their overt support for Mr. Kagame?
Well, I think it's true to say that Rwanda has a particular and singular political settlement. What happened after the genocide by 2003, there was a new constitution in the country. You have to remember that during the genocide, the Hutu power government that was in power waged a campaign to try to eliminate the Tutsi completely. It was akin to what happened during the Holocaust in Germany. And by 2003, the new constitution called for the banning of the politics of ethnic hatred. And essentially what Kagame and the RPF have tried to do, the RPF being the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the ruling party, has been to take race out of politics. By definition, that prescribes a certain amount of hate speech, but I think that's a good thing. If the question is there widespread political opposition in Rwanda, I think the answer is no. And in that sense, Human Rights Watch and others do have a point.
Looking at some of the statements that have come from the EU Foreign Policy Chief Mogherini, from the US Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, do they not get Rwanda when they're saying, hey, Paul Kagame, this is a bad idea. Don't run, step down graciously?
Well, I note the US position and the position taken officially by some other donors. I think privately, diplomats and others take a different view. And there's a very strong feeling that continuity and peace and stability are of absolutely paramount importance, and that it's still early in the process. What Rwanda has been trying to do, if you put it in the bigger picture, if you listen to your package at the beginning, it's all about the genocide and the human rights situation and so forth, and that's all very important. But what's actually going on in the country is the rebuilding of a country from ground zero, and that place was considered to be the epitome of failing states in 1994. And if you visit the country, and if people haven't visited it, go and visit the country and see for yourselves what's going on there. They have a 50-year plan to turn Kigali into a business services hub for East Africa. They've integrated into the into the East African community. They're now members of the Commonwealth. They're trying to build a modern business hub for East Africa based in Kigali. They have plans for infrastructure, for broadband, for education, for health insurance. They have national health insurance for people in Rwanda, more than you can say for the United States.
Steve McCauley, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much. In today's Picture This, the hills of northern Myanmar's Kachin region are home to the world's richest deposits of the gemstone jade. Miners have been rushing to excavate the precious stone from the mineral-rich region in anticipation of a potential industry crackdown by Aung San Suu Kyi's new government, which is due to take office early next year. Take a look. Today's newsmaker has been South African President Jacob Zuma. He's been at the helm of one of Africa's biggest economies since 2009. And just last year won a second term as president. Many supporters of the ruling ANC have started to see through the party's leader. He's lost considerable support from both South Africa's middle class and the far left. Although Zuma and the South African economy appear to have weathered the immediate storm of the finance minister fiasco, some say if he fares badly in next year's municipal election, his days as president may be numbered. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.